You can espouse beautiful values. You can talk about strategy and vision. But if your actions don't match those words, you have a trust gap, you have the say-do gap, and that is reputational.
It's Relationships at Work, a leadership podcast helping you build workplace connection, improve culture, and avoid blind spots. I'm your host, Russell Lolliker, communications and leadership expert with a couple of decades of experience in both those areas. Whole heap of curiosity, too, just like you, on how we can make the workplace a better place. This is, as I've mentioned before this week, a new format for the show. That's right, we're splitting up our full-length conversations around themes and having Monday through Thursday sort of breaking it up per theme. Clarity, relationship with self, relationship with team, and relationship with culture. This week, to kick us off in this new format, we're talking to author, podcaster, and reputation management advisor, Charlotte Otter. All week, she's been helping us understand our reputation management skills, whether it was understanding what reputation management even is, how it shows up, how it doesn't. But we also looked at ourselves and how we can be better with reputation management, what self-work we need to do. And then on Wednesday, yesterday, we dug into that conversation that involves our teams, because that's a very important relationship. And reputation management, it applies as well. Right there for the team that you're responsible for, that we're responsible for, we have to understand what our reputation is for them, what we want it to be, what it isn't in the way we want it to be. Anyway, it's super important to understand that relationship. And we got into that last one. This one, it's a little bigger picture. We're pulling the lens back and we're looking at the whole organization and how our understanding of reputation management can be conflicted or align when it comes to culture, when it comes to how things are done or not done. Because that's super important. We do not work and lead in a vacuum. There are a lot of influences on what we do and how we do it. And it's really important to understand that as well before we move forward and really grasp what we're trying to do here when it comes to reputation management. So this is part 4, wrapping up our 4-part series. I hope you've enjoyed it so far. And so let's talk and have our final conversation with Charlotte Otter. Hold on. How does the unwritten culture of an organization, like norms, values, expectations that are not written down on a website, how does that shape a leader's reputation beyond what they directly can control? I'm getting macro here.
Yeah. I think it certainly can, but I think it always goes back to behavior. So those unwritten norms can be, I've worked in organizations where one of the unwritten norms was the leader needs to get to version 32.A/1 before they've signed anything off. That wasn't written down anywhere. That was a shock to discover. I mean, as a leader, that's a reputation that's going to stick with you. You're a perfectionist, you're a micromanager. That's kind of a hard one to shake off. I do think it's difficult.
Especially if these things, to the unwritten part of that, especially if your organization, your leaders need leaders. And if you as a leader are trying to manage your reputation and you don't know the playbook, you're not given the guardrails to understand, you are going to be wildly throwing darts at it. I'm using way too many metaphors here. Just darts at a dartboard, and it will hurt your reputation through no fault of your own.
Yeah, but it does go back to having those transparent conversations at the beginning, and maybe also saying to your team, look, folks, what do I need to know? What don't I know? I'm making these assumptions as I come into this organization. What do I need to know? What do I need to look out for?
How does values play into this? Because we each have our own personal values. The organization has their values. We like to think they're mostly in alignment, but sometimes they're misaligned. So how does that play in reinforcing or even maybe damaging reputation?
Values are absolutely critical. Going back to the say-do gap, if you say my values are integrity, honesty, and trust, and then you behave in the opposite of that, nobody's going to believe a word you say. I do think that organizations over-index on finding 5 nice values, slapping them on a wall and ignoring them. But I recently came across a French company that does such a brilliant job. So everybody knows what the values are. And at the start of every meeting, whoever is hosting that meeting says, This meeting will be held in the spirit of transparency, or whatever value they choose. This meeting will be held in the spirit of healthy debate. And by voicing it at the start of every meeting, you set the tone. I think it's an amazing and useful strategy that a lot more organizations could make the most of.
I love that you jumped into communication because that's obviously a huge piece of this. So you are a leader. You are happy with the reputation, or at least you're comfortable with the reputation you have. How does communication play into this when it comes to the larger organization? Because your team can understand your reputation, but if you're trying to move up in your career, you're trying to build a network, you're trying to build relationships that will foster and help your career growth. What do you do with that reputation? I'm holding it like it's a ball. Like, what am I doing with this? What am I doing with this thing I've created?
Yeah, I think it's really important for those leaders with ambition to get comfortable with power. So build relationships with power. You know, build relationships with those step leaders, so leaders who are 2 levels above you in the organization. Also build relationships parallel to you. So it's about the relationships above, the relationships parallel, and the relationships below. And people generally tend to forget one of them. So you can be super indexed on your own team, super indexed on your step leaders, and forget your peers. Forget your peers at your peril, because those peers can destroy you. So you have to think about all three.
In thinking in that, in reaching out to people, and if you don't have a fully grasped understanding of your reputation, because you may have a reputation you're not aware of to other business areas that could be geographically dispersed. Like we're in United States, we have an agency in Germany, and I don't know what my reputation is there. Are there things we can do as we go into other pieces of culture, the many subcultures, to put our best foot forward in that?
I think it's behavioral at this stage. So show them that you understand the business, offer help, say to them, maybe you need, if you need a door opening in the US, let me know. I'll see what I can do to help you. I think it's behavioral at that point.
What do you mean you say when we need new leaders? When you say that we need new leaders and it is tied to reputation management, what are you trying to tell us, Charlotte?
I am trying to say that the leaders we have right now are not the leaders we need in this moment, that we have returned to. We briefly opened the door on a new school of leadership, style of leadership, and then we closed the door. We've returned to an old school, extremely masculine, command and control, top down style of leadership. And I'm saying we need a change. We need to accept that leaders come from all kinds of backgrounds and identities, that being loud and shouty doesn't necessarily make you an excellent leader, that you can be quiet and empathetic and be a good leader. And the reputation aspect of that is, I am saying to those leaders from diverse identities, diverse backgrounds, underrepresented minorities, you can't argue with an excellent record of success. And a record of success is not only doing the job well. That is only half of doing the job well. The other half of it is talking about doing the job well, and even better, getting other people to talk about how well you do the job. So that record of success is not attended this course, managed a team of 5, was incredibly productive. The record is the speaking. So that's why I say you need to be seen and heard as the leader that you are. And I'm saying to leaders from diverse backgrounds and identities, use the tools of reputation management, lean on your communicators if they exist in the organization, lean on the social networks, they're there. I mean, LinkedIn is a wonderful internal communications tool. If you've got a success, put it on LinkedIn, don't be shy. Much harder to argue with when you've got that shiny record of success.
I'm putting on my comms hat here as well because you said something in there that I don't think gets hammered home a lot, is that you might not be the right messenger sometimes, and that it is extremely important to have other people tell your story, not just yourself, because they have different relationships, they have different reputations. I remember trying to do a lot of change management and knowing that I had a new reputation, I was new to the organization, so I wasn't trying to get executive on board. I was trying to get the people that they're champions on board because I knew they listened to them. They didn't have any reputation. They didn't know me, but they knew this person A. So for that, I had champions of reputation. I had champions that would be in the rooms that I couldn't be in to tell my story. I just had to make sure I communicated to them in a particular way. So interesting.
Yeah, and that goes to the back to the network. So we talked about the stories. We've talked a lot about behaviors. The networks are crucial. Without the networks, your reputation dies with you.
I kind of feel like I know the answer to this, but I have to ask it. Does it matter around perception versus reality? Because as reputation, sometimes it's not true that people think about us, know about us, whether it's in this organization or another. Reputation management can be as much about perception as it is about reality. Do we approach it any differently, or does it matter at all?
It does matter, and I've noticed that leaders who come from underrepresented minorities and diverse backgrounds and identities think about perception a lot, because Mary Ann Sieghart, the author of The Authority Gap, says bias is the flip side of perception. So if you are a leader from the dominant power group, you don't have to worry about perception at all. You just walk through doors. But if you look different from the norm, perception is really important to you.
Yeah, I mean, the old saying, perception is reality for a lot of people. So that's what I was sort of getting at, is the idea that even though perception is very important for us to get in, we can't just dismiss it because it's a perception. It is astronomically important that we take that in. And your white cis males do not have the same challenges, to your point, as people coming from other geographies, cultures, socioeconomic, everything else. And if we're going to talk about diversity, if we're going to actually make this part of our conversation, this has to be part of it.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I can tell you that the emerging and established leaders I've interviewed, hyper aware of how they're perceived. They think about it all the time. Don't stop thinking about it. But they also try to enhance it with speaking their truth, acting according to their values, building good networks, getting comfortable with power in the organization, and building that record of success.
So we've never thought of reputation management. I'm speaking for somebody that might be listening. Never thought of it. What, who, where? I made it 20 years into my career. I've never even thought of this before, but maybe I should be. Where do they put their efforts starting tomorrow? Where do they dip their toe in the pond? Man, it's metaphor heavy today. Where do we start tomorrow if we're needing to really understand this better?
Yeah. I just want to first say it usually comes at an inflection point. People waking up and like, oh, I need to think about my reputation right now. So, for example, I had a customer who was CFO of his organization. The CEO and founder had a big argument with the board, disappeared. Suddenly, the CFO had been a backroom guy and was suddenly front of house in his organization. Suddenly had to think about his reputation. And I took him through the process that I do with leaders. But it's usually that point of inflection, that change, where leaders start to think, what are my stories? Very deeply hidden in reputation is personal brand. It's something I don't talk about a lot, but it's who am I? What do I stand for? What do I want to stand for? What are my stories? How do those stories support the business strategy going forward? So there's a kind of some quiet work around personal brand. And then where do I go with them? Where are the networks I'm taking them to? What are the channels? Where am I trying to be seen?
We talked about gaps a lot when it comes to what you do versus what you say. And I think that's so important to understand what is your reputation and what do you want your reputation to be. And that is an absolutely a gap that may be very far away, but it might actually be a lot closer than you think. And as you said, unless you understand and get real vulnerable and real honest with yourself, that gap will never get closed.
No, and I think that the people who generally come to me, there's a certain level of self-awareness already. I think that there are some leaders who probably aren't going to ever bother with working on it. Excuse me. But people with self-awareness want to understand more.
Until their PR firm tells them that they need to start maybe working on their reputation because they said something stupid on LinkedIn.
That's also an inflection point. Ouch.
Thank you so much. That is Charlotte Otter. She's an author, speaker, podcast host, and she has a podcast you definitely should check out, which is called Speech Bubbles. And she's got a brand new book that you even more should really check out called We Need New Leaders, Mastering Reputation Management to Reshape the C-Suite. Thank you so much for being here, Charlotte.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
That's it. We are finished. I want to thank Charlotte Otter for being such an amazing guest, for helping us through this new format. I think it really worked. I think it really, really worked well with this topic. And Charlotte and how she focused on certain things with reputation management, I think it just flowed really well. Again, really want to hear your feedback on how this format's working for you. This is what we're doing for the foreseeable future. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you find it of value. I hope it's a little bit more intentional day to day so that you and me can lead better. My grammar's not great, but you get my intention. Needless to say, thank you so much. Tomorrow, it's going to be a little different too. Usually the solo episodes are going to come out every Friday. That's not going to be the case for the next couple of weeks. I'm actually doing a Work Human series. I was out at Work Human Live a couple of weeks ago and had some amazing conversations with some pretty big heavy hitters in this leadership space: employee engagement, workplace culture, communication, all the areas that only help us get better in the workplace. And I'm looking really forward to sharing those with you. Those will come out over the next 6 weeks, every Friday. So yeah, I'm excited. And without further ado, I'm gonna leave you there. Take care.